It's winter here in New York City, and I'm in the studio, and it's snowing pretty hard outside. Actually, it's really beautiful. When I have the pleasure of speaking to large groups at colleges and universities or at openings, one of the most frequent questions I hear is, do I have a concept in mind when I start a painting, or do I simply just start the painting? And you know, I've tried to formulate sexy sounding answers over the years to that question, but the older I get, the more I realize that the honest answer to that question is, I don't know. I don't know. I know that I show up here every day and I get to work. And I'm a believer that the concepts in the painting are generated through the practice. That the ideas are embedded in the material, in the sticky, obdurate oil paint. And then the viewer hopefully experiences the evidence of that practice and formulates concepts of their own. I've always believed that an eye not told what to see, sees more. And whenever I go to museums and I look at great, time-tested, durable paintings, I can sense that the ideas and the material are the same thing, that there's no gap between the subject and the object. They're the same thing. I know that Monday is my favorite day of the week because it's back to work. And one of my favorite things to look at is a blank canvas. So I'm very much about work. My kids remind me of the story of the centipede when asked which one of its 100 legs he moves first in order to walk, thinks about it, and then he can't walk. So I'm sure as hell not going to think about this too much. The other day I was looking at a catalog from the Museum of Modern Art from an exhibition in 1965, which is the year I was born, called The Responsive Eye. And it featured, among other artists, Bridget Riley, who's an interesting painter I've been reconsidering in the past couple of weeks. And Riley cites two types of color: pictorial color, which is using color to create a picture, and perceptual color, which is using color as it actually is. And this is valid to me because I try to use both types of color at the same time, as many painters do. On one hand, I want to create depth and atmosphere and space, and then I want to ricochet the viewer back to the surface, back to the flat, two-dimensional plane. Which is why I tend to favor very thick applications of paint when I want to stress that perceptual mode of color. So on one hand, you're invited to look into the picture, and then you're challenged to look at the picture. And I like the fact that it can't be both at the same time. It's either one or the other. You're either looking into or you're looking at. One interior, one exterior. And I think this is what I like so much about Cubism. The notion of the laws of nature giving way to the laws of art. The laws of nature being governed by real light and real mass. The laws of art being governed by a flat two-dimensional surface, and then visual information arranged on that surface. And lately I've been thinking about the treatment of light in 19th century American versus European painting, specifically Impressionist painting. And I've been reading about this, and it's interesting, the American treatment of light tends to be a more symbolic one. Light is used to caress and to locate an object in space and give it volume. If you look at this example of Winslow Homer, you can see there are discernible shadows under the figures. There's a fair degree of contrast between light and dark, and the light is used to move around the figures and to locate them in space and to find their form and solidity. And then if you look at this example of Monet from almost the same year, the light is used to destroy the object rather than locate the object. the object is destroyed in favor of the picture plane. The light is broken up into fractals and spread out across the entire surface, which I suppose stresses the picture as object rather than image. And I'm talking about this because I'm trying to use both at the same time. I like to think of color not to describe form, but color as form. I have no interest in describing. I'm much more interested in possessing. It's much more fun. There are certainly landscape elements to my paintings, although I don't necessarily think of them as landscapes as I'm painting them. I'm just as involved in process as I am in the image of landscape. The word abstraction for me, I use abstraction only as a process, not as a style. To abstract simply means to remove, which implies it must be removed from somewhere. And for me, it's from the landscape. And not just a landscape in a picturesque sense, but much deeper in the, all the way to the bone marrow, something much more internalized. When you think of abstraction as a style, it's too easy to get into representation of abstraction. If that makes any sense, it's possible to paint a representation of abstraction, which doesn't make any sense to me. It has to come from somewhere concrete. The reason I prefer the image of landscape over the figure is because it suggests a type of loneliness. When the viewer stands there looking at it and there's no figure looking back, I think it implicates the viewer on a deeper level. And it gives the viewer, I think, more to do. The way I suggest the human presence in the painting is through very simple vertical and horizontal means. The vertical always referring to the human figure, and the horizontal always to the horizon line. And there's little detonations that occur as they cross throughout the picture, I think remind the viewer of their place in not recreating, but in creating an experience right there on the spot, one-to-one. Have a look at this more recent vertical painting. This one's currently in my show here in New York at Forum Gallery. If you look on the left side, you can see a hot red shape, and then just above it a much cooler violet shape, suggesting an object and then the shadow cast by that object. This is something I learned from the 18th century painter Tiepolo, who would often paint his figures with the light side and the shadow side with the same level of intensity. And there's something about when you use the same intensity of color in the shadow as in the light, it flattens the plane, it fragments the picture, and it creates kinetic energy. It also creates a really satisfying sense of dimension, which I find attractive. Tiepolo was at the forefront of a kind of freedom in color that I want to learn more about. I build up the thickest parts in the paintings layer by layer, and I let each successive layer dry before I go on to the next one. Sometimes I'll work on the painting flat on the floor as well, which helps you to build up and out that way. Occasionally I'll use something called cold wax medium, which is, it's kind of like the thickness of peanut butter, and it's got kind of a velvety feeling, and it dries. You don't want to use about 30% wax to about 70% paint, otherwise you can deal with cracking. But it gives the paint a nice kind of stiff quality, and then it dries very matte, which is also quite seductive looking. Another thing I can do to build up the thickness of the paint is I'll mix the colors that I need on the palette, and then I'll take that amount and I'll put it on newsprint. You can use newspaper as well, but I'm just using plain print here. And spread it out fairly thinly. And then, over the course of the next 15 or 20 minutes, it'll start to absorb the oil out into the paper. And then you can scoop it up again like this, and what you have again is a much thicker and heavier and stiffer quality of paint.